This is On the Spectrum podcast with Nick and
Steve.
And this is a podcast by autists for autists. Just as a disclaimer up front, we do not presume to be experts in anything whatsoever. Yes, we're going to have some foul language, and you may or may not hear things that you agree with or disagree with, but that's up to you to decide how long you listen to the podcast. We'd prefer you listen to the entire thing to get a full concept of who we are and what we're talking about, but if you only listen to it until we say a naughty word, well, that's on you.
Dingleberry. So you can shut it off now. So what are we talking about today, Nicholas?
So today's topic, we're going to talk about relationships. This is kind of a topic that for people on the spectrum, it's kind of a rough topic to talk about because we not only have a hard time getting into relationships, we have a hard time having relationships, maintaining relationships. And in general, we're going to talk about all types of relationships, but probably we're going to focus more so on intimate partner relationships more so than anything else. But we kind of have issues with all relationships, if you will. Folks on the spectrum, just because we have some social issues, let's call them social deficits, if you will, because we don't necessarily walk, talk, and act or conceive the world in the same way as other people, relationships can be very, very hard because any given relationship, any interaction you have with another human being has tendency to involve the other person. And sometimes we're not the best in the world at remembering or being considerate to others.
Also, not always great at acknowledging or understanding how what we do is going to affect the other person. And also them not understanding our needs and our issues. Like, for instance, in intimate relationships, being physically close to people, sometimes people on the spectrum have proximity issues.
Like me. I really have a hard time with people being close to my face. Not just like them putting their hand near my face, which I don't like, but I've always had kind of a little bit of an issue like kissing people and having my face that
Luckily
close.
for Nick, not many people want to be close to his face.
That is a true statement.
No, I have an issue with people being close to my face as well, which sometimes I can deal with it, especially like if I'm inebriated. It doesn't bother me as much, but
valid. Me too.
But if I'm not drunk and then somebody's up in my face, I can only deal with it for so long, and then I start to get a little anxious.
Yes, I would describe the feeling as anxious as well. Yes.
I don't think I really have as much of an issue with people touching other parts of my body or being close to other parts of my body. It depends. But yeah. Like I don't mind cuddling or being physically close, but I don't like people in my face, especially their hands or their face in my face. So
their face is problematic. I on the other hand, I also have issues with just physical proximity to other people, like tactile, just in general, like when people touching my skin or standing too close to somebody in an elevator is a problem for me. So I actually prefer to be a little bit further away from people. So actually COVID was a great excuse for me to not stand near people.
Also, it was a great time for him because he got to cover his face and no one could see what he actually looked like.
Valid. Very valid.
It was a fashion statement that I wish Nick would continue to adopt.
Well, I was thinking about moving to China just so I could wear a mask more often.
That's right. And your obsession with General Tso's. So
that is a true statement. All right. So first and foremost, why don't we say, Steve, are you currently in a relationship with a partner right now?
I am.
So anyone who's listening who's an NT or neurotypical or not on the spectrum, that's a response you're going to typically find from somebody on the spectrum. They answer exactly what you ask them, and they don't elaborate at all. Unlike you NT people who have tendency to elaborate a bit much.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask me a question, I'm going to answer the question you asked.
Me too. Which is why my general response when people are like, so, hey, Nick, how do you like what I'm wearing? Okay. I mean, I don't have an opinion. You're the one who chose to wear it. Like,
Yeah. I think some people that I've dated actually appreciate the honesty. You know, like if they ask you if something looks bad, and I'll just be like, yeah, that looks like shit. I'll just...
I would agree that people have told me that they appreciate the honesty, But then when I have too long of a relationship with them, or when they're with me for, months or a couple of years, they really don't like the honesty anymore.
Well, wouldn't you rather your partner tell you if you look ridiculous than to go out in public and look ridiculous?
Everybody's going to say yes, they prefer that, but when the reality sets in, they don't want it. They don't want somebody to tell them they look fat in those jeans. Nobody actually wants that, but they all say, I want my partner to be completely honest with me. No, you really don't.
I mean, I have that same issue when it comes to work. There's lots of companies I worked for, and they'll say, oh, we prefer people to be honest and upfront. We want people who are going to be, gonna tell us like it is. And then when you do that, and then the next thing you know, you got a pink slip.
Yeah, they don't really want honesty. Nobody truly actually wants real honesty out of anybody.
Or when you give them suggestions about how to improve the business, which, over the years I've learned like how to do it in more subtle ways rather than just telling, hey, what you're doing is fucking stupid. You should do it differently. But I'll subtly give them hints about like, hey, maybe this might make more sense, and try to make them think it's their idea. Or tell them my idea, but like just kind of with a softer approach.
I agree. I've learned the same thing over the years. I learned how to be subtle, which again is one of those things that we have a hard time learning. We have a hard time learning subtlety. We have a tendency to be pretty. What are the words people describe me as? Brash. What are some of the other ones? They call me brash, upfront,
abrasive.
That's one of my faves. Somebody once described me as
annoying,
being combative.
You put the cum in combative.
Oh, thank you. And to answer the question that Steve did not ask or did not reciprocate, yes, I also am in a relationship currently as well.
Well, we were still talking about me, so I...
Really? Because I thought we were talking generally for a second there, but yeah, okay.
We were, I guess. I don't know.
All right. So, what, in your opinion, Steve, for you in your life, what have you found to be probably like, what happens to be a common theme among intimate partner relationships for you of a difficulty?
If you're dating a normal person, when I say normal with air quotes.
So, okay. To the best of my knowledge, neither one of us have ever dated somebody on the spectrum before.
If they were, I didn't know about it.
Right. So, because that's not even a question we would ask.
A normie.
But in that regard, so what's one of the difficulties that's like a common theme among a lot of your relationships, if not all of them?
Them thinking that I'm emotionally distant, or I have a hard time talking about my feelings, which is true. A lot of times it's because I don't really understand how I feel about things. So it takes me a while to process, like to understand how to put into words whatever I feel. So, or to know what those feelings mean.
So you sounded like you were questioning that. And the only thing I thought of in that moment when you said that was like, is that really your issue, or is it an issue they had that you had to deal with?
It's because I don't communicate the way they want me to communicate.
So again, that sounds like their problem, not yours.
So, if they want you to, I don't know, express love the way that they want you to express it, or, if you're not upfront about your feelings about something, or they want you to be emotionally available, and you're not able to do that, then they feel like you don't care about them.
Well, I had a lot of the same issues in a very similar way. They wanted me to express emotion and be physical, or be affectionate, I should say, their way, without taking into consideration that I might do it differently. Granted, yeah. I was in my 30s when I figured out the autism piece. And so prior to that, even in teenage years, right, they wanted me to express things a certain way. They wanted me to communicate in a certain way. And I always felt like there was something wrong with me. Like,
there is something wrong with you, but
yeah, there is. I always thought, well, how come I can't? How come I can't do it the way they want me to? And so I went through a long number of years thinking there was something wrong with me, opposed to evaluating it from the sense of, well, maybe I was just with the wrong person.
Yeah, I always took it as there must be something wrong with me, or I'm just weird. Because I figured there had to be something wrong with me as to why most of my relationships didn't work out very well. Like why don't any of my relationships ever work out?
Yeah.
Whatever I wanted from the relationship, I wasn't getting. Whatever the other person wanted, they clearly weren't getting. And I didn't know what I was doing wrong. I think another thing I was going to mention about what you said, like that people have a problem with, is people like us typically need time alone.
Right. We need space.
Frequently need time alone to tinker, to go into dwarf mode,
Focus on our fixations.
When I say dwarf mode, I mean, like in fantasy, the dwarfs are usually like builders and tinkerers.
Yeah.
So, we go into dwarf mode and need to go like build something or read or whatever it is that, whatever it is that we fixate on. Or even like if, you just want a couple hours to go play a video game and space out and like decompress. Yeah. But I think that
desensitize? No, destimulate? Yeah,
which
I'm okay with that.
People usually, most people need time alone to do things. So regular people too. Well, but I think the difference is that the fixation part. Yeah. So like if I'm into video editing, if I'm working on a video and I'm spending an hour working on it, I don't like being pulled away from it.
So, and it's not, because you just said like they need time too, and you're right. Like NTs need time too, but not as much time as we need. Like we really need time to pull away from everything else in our life, everything else in our world, and kind of focus on that thing that settles us.
I also find, for me, one of the things that's always been very relaxing or relieve stress for me is being outside, like going out into the woods or being somewhere around nature, not around people, but around just like trees and animals and plants. Like that makes me feel comfortable. Like I would probably be fine if I were to just become a lumberjack and go live in the woods in a cabin and just drink disgusting burnt coffee from a percolator and chop wood and wear flannel.
Burnt coffee, huh?
Well, because if you're living out in a cabin in the woods, you're probably drinking shitty coffee from like a percolator or something.
It's horrible. At that point, you really need a friend who roasts coffee.
I didn't know what a percolator was like a year or two ago, and I found out what a percolator was. And people used to make coffee that way.
Yes, they do.
And one of the things I learned about it is that it burns the coffee because of the way that it heats it.
Right.
So you're anytime you make coffee in a percolator, you're basically getting burnt coffee.
Yes.
So
yeah, percolating coffee is not a good way to do coffee. If only people had a friend who roasted their own coffee. So today's episode is being brought to you by Nick's Roasting Shed, where he roasts his own coffee.
Yeah. It seems like it's being used more for podcast than roasting, but
yo, Bull, man, I'm in here once a week with you recording this, and I also roast in here once a week.
And he gets all of his coffee ethically sourced, not from sweatshops and slave farms and
sweatshops.
Yeah.
Okay. People don't get coffee from shops; they get coffee from the ground.
You get beans from slave farms in South America.
I don't get none of that.
I know.
Thank God. But yeah, so that happens to be one of my kind of fixations, if you will, one of my obsessions. Which I think I mentioned in a different episode, but I don't remember. But there's that. So moving back onto what we were talking about, you say you like being out in the woods. That's actually a thing that causes me a lot of anxiety, a lot of uncomfortableness is being out in the woods, being out in nature. I preferably would be locked in my house all the time. Like if I could make money sitting in my house and not have to leave very often, I'd love it. As well as I actually get more, relaxation, let's call it, or I get more personal time when I'm out in public and I don't know somebody and I'm just like wandering around a mall, or I'm going to an event that is populated by people and I don't know a lot of people and I can just watch. Like that actually brings me a lot of like peace.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't like being in crowded areas. The last time, so I haven't had panic attacks frequently over the last like 5 or 6 years. Not very often. I used to get them more frequently, especially after I quit smoking cigarettes. But the last time I had like a real panic attack was probably when I went to see Clerks 3 and it was in a tiny theater, and Kevin Smith was there, and Brian O'Halloran was there. That's his name, right? Brian O'Halloran. Yeah, Brian O'Halloran was there, and the room was really hot. It wasn't in the summer, it was in the fall, so it was kind of cold out, but the theater was boiling hot because it was so crowded, and there were so many people there. And halfway through the movie, I had a panic attack. I just got up. I felt dizzy. I thought I was going to pass out. I went to the bathroom. I get dizzy like at the urinal. I was peeing, and I felt like I was going to fall over. Yeah. Splashed some water on my face and went down to the bar. And the bartender gave me a free shot of whiskey because I told him that I was like, hey, I'm just chilling out for a minute, having a panic attack. Because everybody's watching the movie and I'm standing in the lobby. So they gave me a shot of bourbon on the house, which was nice. Mm-hmm. So I had a shot of bourbon, kind of calm the nerves a little bit. And then I went back in and finished the movie. But I was probably gone for like 20 minutes and missed like 25 minutes of the movie.
And by no way are we advocating that drinking alcohol is a valid treatment for anxiety or panic attacks.
It's just not a valid form of treatment, but it's an effective one.
Hey, I didn't say nothing about effectiveness. Anyway, so that was the last time. That was just last year. Yeah,
that was in like September, I think. I think it was something like September that. When it was right before it came out in theaters.
Yeah.
Kevin Smith was doing a tour. Right. And with Brian O'Halloran and the woman who played his girlfriend, I think, in the first Clerks.
The very first Clerks movie?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't have any idea what
she was there. I don't remember her name, but she was, I think that was her.
Yeah, the one in the first movie where she said she sucked 37 dicks in the parking lot.
Yeah, I think that was who was with him. I can't remember now, but it was Brian O'Halloran, Kevin Smith, and her, I believe.
Okay.
And they were supposed to have Jason Mewes there too, but for some reason he wasn't there. I guess I don't know if it was something came up and he wasn't able to be on the tour. So
okay.
But it was fun. Besides the panic attack,
right?
It was actually because they had this whole scene in the movie where Brian's character. The hell's his name?
Jason Mewes.
No, the two clerks. What's the two clerks' names? We have
Dante and Randall.
Yeah, Randall
are the character names.
Randall has a heart attack.
Yeah, and his real name is Jeff Anderson. Not related to me, but Jeff Anderson.
Yeah, he has a heart attack, and then they have him in the ER. Yeah. And they're like putting a stint in and all this stuff, and that scene just like I don't like medical stuff like that, so it kind of triggered me.
Okay.
Anything like that, it creeps me out. Like I don't like in movies where they show people getting a needle or blood taken, or when they're like shoving a tube up someone's artery into their heart, like all that stuff kind of like it physically makes me feel ill. All right. So that part in the movie bothered me, and that's when I had the panic attack because it made me feel uncomfortable.
So you had like several triggering moments at the same time, essentially.
Yeah, and I felt like I was gonna pass out because I've had panic attacks before, but I actually felt like this was one that was. So I've had panic attacks that last a long time.
Yeah.
But I've had ones that are shorter. This was a short one, but it was intense versus like a longer one, which is less intense.
Yeah.
This was like, I feel like I'm going to pass out. I got cold. I was sweating. You know, when you ever get like a cold sweat where you're just drenched and clammy.
Yep.
Like that's completely. What happened. I was covered in sweat, clammy.
My last panic attack was little more than a year ago or so when I hit that deer and totaled my car.
Yeah.
That was kind of the last time, but that's kind of like it's situational based, right? It's very much a situational based. It wasn't like a reoccurrent kind of thing. The time prior to that, I hadn't had them for years and years and years because I kind of, for the most part, figured out how to control like those moments.
Kind of manage any stress before it becomes a problem.
Exactly. I kind of, knew situations or moments as it was starting to arise and I was able to handle it a little bit. But that moment was just a bit too much for me.
I think another before that panic attack, I think the last one I had was when I was in a car with several other people and they were all talking very loudly. And I had to pull over. At the time, I didn't have any medication or anything because I hadn't been on medication for anxiety or anything for a while. So I ended up pulling into this place and doing a couple shots of whiskey because I was freaking out. And I don't like being in an enclosed space with a bunch of loud people.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I remember those times. Yeah. Sound can be definitely a thing there. So let's go back on topic a little bit. Thank you for sharing, Steve, but let's go back on topic. Relationships in jazz. Do you have a question? And thank you for redirecting me back to looking at my mic when I talk.
No, I just noticed that we weren't picking up your audio well when you talk sideways.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah.
Sorry, I lose track of the fact I'm talking on the microphone and talking for a podcast opposed to just talking to Steve. So, when it comes to relationships, that was one of your common themes that you said was kind of the communication,
not understanding the
affection
space.
stuff. Yeah. Well, give me one more common theme amongst a lot of them.
Just not understanding a lot of my behavior.
Okay.
Like when I say behavior, I just mean certain things that people like us might do that people who aren't like us might not understand.
True statements.
Like routine.
Yep.
Habitual things.
Yep.
And the other person might think it's weird or strange or not understand why you get irritated or why it bothers you if your habits or your routines get interrupted.
How about where things are placed? Do you ever have a problem with like everything has a place and everything in its place and when somebody moves something of yours, does that ever make you freak out?
But it doesn't bother me that much.
Oh.
But it can. I guess it depends on what it is.
Oh.
Like I have a place for my important things like my keys and my wallet and things like that.
Sure.
So if those things get moved, then it kind of bothers me. But most other things I'm not like, depends.
Yeah. Well, in most of my adult life, up until I got with my current partner, every relationship prior than that, like if I put something somewhere, that's its place. I know I'm going to find it there. I know it's there. I can feel secure in knowing that it's there.
Nick, I cleaned up your t-shirt. It was on the floor. No, that's its place.
Pretty much, yeah. And that's kind of the reaction. Yes, it's ridiculous and silly, and I get it. And I shouldn't have clothes on the floor. But that's where I put it. That's where I know it is. I know where to find it.
Actually,
that kind of stuff bothers me.
Now that you mention that, I would say I haven't really had an issue with that in relationships.
Oh.
But I did have an issue with that when I was growing up with my mom moving my crap around.
Yes.
So my mother used to, like if I was at school when I was a kid, or if I was out of the house for a while or at work when I was a teenager, and I would come home and she would clean my room, or, I had my own section of the house. I had like a little living room and kitchen area.
Yeah.
And if I came home and she moved everything around, that used to stress me the fuck out. Where I'd come home and like, I cleaned up for you. I'm like, no. I'm like, why'd she clean everything? But then I couldn't find anything and it would drive me nuts. I'm like, where the fuck is this? Where the fuck is that?
Yeah. I was similar with that. My mom always, before I start talking about my upbringing and my mom, Mom, you might want to pause this or let it run. You go to the bathroom, go get something to eat, something else, walk your dog, whatever it is. Because I'm not saying I'll say anything bad about you, but I know how you are. And I'm not saying anything bad about you. It's just an example. My mom used to describe
By the way, Nick's mom, it's not too late to consider abortion.
This is very late term. It's still your choice, but my body, I don't know. Anyway, so when I was growing up, my mom described how I was when I was growing up. And she said I was always very neat and tidy. And I would always like clean my room constantly and keep things very ordered when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily remember that because to me, that's just the way I wanted my room. But she described it as being that way, that I always had an order for everything. And I would always reorder stuff and reorganize things a different way, but it was always very ordered, right? Somehow I became an adult and I lost a lot of that. Not exactly, but I did. And I mean, I can blame it on a whole lot of things. Like for one, I went through a great deal of depression and issues with depression when I was in my teens and 20s. Not unsimilar to other people, but I ended up kind of like losing a lot of that for a while. And it wasn't until I found out I was bipolar and I started taking my meds for bipolar that I really kind of was able to get back to having that organization again. And I was way less chaotic.
Yeah.
So has that ever come into issue in a relationship for you, whether it be like roommates as friends or intimate partner relationships, like wanting things to be in a certain way?
Not really moving things. Like the main issue I had was growing up with my parents moving stuff around, mainly my mother. But I haven't really, none of my, my current girlfriend will clean up my stuff sometimes, but most of the time she cleans up stuff and it doesn't bother me.
Right.
The way she's doing it. And also I just I'm over it. Like she won't touch anything that's important anyway, but like if there's just something that needs to be neatened up, she'll like neaten it up a bit. But
right.
So I'd say it hasn't really been a big issue for me, but you did make me think about something when you were talking about like your teenage years. And I would say it took me a long time to be able to even have any sort of healthy relationship. I think when I was a teenager, I had this kind of delusional understanding of what a relationship was. And I think I think a lot of teenagers probably don't have a good understanding of what a healthy relationship looks like in general.
Of course not.
But the understanding now, being older, like looking back, I think some of it was related to being on the spectrum. But I had these unrealistic expectations of my partner. So whenever I started dating somebody, I would become mildly obsessed with them, and I expected all of their time. Like I expected them to be as fixated on me as I was on them. And
can anyone relate to that? I can.
So I used to get mildly obsessed with people I started dating. And if they didn't give me the same level of attention that I was giving them, I would get upset and not understand why it wasn't being reciprocated, because I didn't understand that people need space. And, I didn't understand all that. So I had a lot of problems because I would get into these short-term relationships with girls that I was dating, and it would go well for like a couple months, and then it would just turn to shit.
Right.
So that was kind of like all of my younger years when I was dating, like, 16 through my mid-20s were just all shitty relationships that I didn't understand how to handle being in a relationship with somebody. I didn't understand giving people boundaries. I didn't understand really any of it. I just had all these expectations in my head that didn't match up with reality.
No, everything you just described, I can agree with. Now, here's my question for you, because we're not just autistic people, but we are also very highly creative and artistic people. And in that
artistic and autistic.
We're autists. All right. I had to say it at least once on the podcast. All right. So with that being said, right, do you think it was autism per se that caused you to feel that way and get really obsessed with the person? Or do you think maybe it was because we're artistic and we're very highly emotional people and we're creative folks? Because that's kind of a way creative folk have tendency to be too. They get highly into somebody very quickly, but then kind of fizzle out with that.
I don't know. I used to blame it on socialization. I thought maybe I just wasn't socialized well as a kid, because I had a lot of acquaintances, but not a lot of close friends, and I spent a lot of time by myself. So then when I started dating, I figured it was just because I didn't understand social relationships very well. But I'm sure that being on the spectrum also played into that.
Probably.
I think I was also I was expecting that a girl or a woman would come into my life and kind of fix all of my problems, which is a common thing that young men do. They think that if they're struggling in their life or they have different difficulties or insecurities, that they're going to find somebody who's just going to solve all their problems and make their life whole.
Do you think that's just a man problem or a male problem? Because with a lot of the females that I've had in my life that are friends and even previous partners, I've heard that quite often, that people fall into that weird kind of thinking of they wanted somebody to help them, fix them, be their support, and in a lot of ways didn't want to do the same for them, but wanted somebody else to kind of do that.
I think I was expecting that someone would come into my life and that it would develop into a relationship where they would be like family right away. I was never super close to most of my family growing up. So I think I was trying to replace that intimate relationship that I didn't have with people around me with a romantic relationship.
I always felt, and for most of my life, and actually there are still times where I feel to this day, that I felt completely disconnected from others, like completely emotionally cut off or disconnected. When I was growing up, I felt that way quite a bit. I mean, it's one of the longest running emotional feelings that I had from when I was growing up, not just as a kid, but also a teenager in my early 20s, was I always felt disconnected from everyone. And so when I started becoming of age to wanting a partner and kind of moving forward in life and wanting somebody to share my life with, it was really, I was trying to seek somebody I connected with. And granted, I had no idea what the fuck that actually meant. I had no idea what being connected to somebody really meant. And so it was connected in any way possible. And so like, I mean, for a real long time, I went from one person to another, seeking whatever connection I could fucking get.
I think that if you're looking for the relationship, like if you have this idealistic understanding of what a relationship is or should be, you tend not to actually date the person that you're dating. You tend to date an idealized version of them.
Very true.
They're this person in your head that doesn't actually exist, that you've made up, and they're not going to live up to the standards that you've set because you have this vision of this person in your head that's not really who they are. And so you're not actually dating the person themselves, which I think is kind of part of what you were saying. So as I got older, I started dating the person in front of me rather than projecting my idealized version of a partner onto them. You know, and creating this made up person in my head of who I thought they should be, who I wanted them to be,
right,
and just accepting them for who they are.
I mean, I think a lot of people kind of have that idea you just described of like they're with somebody and they're really dating who they think the person should be or who the person could be, opposed to who the person is.
Like there's the old stereotype of women trying to change a guy.
Yeah.
Like,
I think we all do that though.
Like, you know, they get into, I know, but I'm saying for the sake of the conversation, you know, there's a stereotype that a guy dates a woman and then the woman constantly tries to make him into somebody he's not.
Right.
For what they think would make him a better man.
Right.
Not that I'm saying that men don't try to change women either, but it's just...
I think it's human nature for us to get with somebody and we see a potential in them and we try to shape them.
I do feel like it's probably more common with women,
or at least that's the stereotype of it. Yeah,
but I feel like there's some truth to that. Well, at least in my personal experience with seeing relationships that other people have had, and also my own personal experiences with women. I haven't dated women, although I did have an idealized version of them, etc. sometimes. But I never tried to like make them change. But I have dated women who have tried to force me to change.
Okay, I guarantee if we asked your exes, they would give the conception that they thought that you were trying to change them in some way. Because I'll tell you from my previous long-term relationships, not the short, 3 month, 6 month ones that I did at some point, but from a lot of my longer-term relationships, I did not feel as if I was trying to change anybody. And I always felt that I was completely accepting of who a human being was that I was with. But when I've talked to some of my exes, they have told me...
That's right. That one, she told me that you tried to force her to get into Brazilian fart porn.
Oh, my good God. None of that is true at all. My God. So, like... Even,
or the mild cockophilia.
Oh, Jesus.
Is it coprophilia? Coprophilia is the one where you're... you like poop? Is that what it's called? Coprophilia?
I have no idea, but I know that that is one of the philiac things.
Coprophilia. Nick loves poop.
So from some of my previous longer term relationships, they told me they felt like at one point that I was trying to change them. I never felt that way. I never thought I was doing that. I never felt that way. But that's kind of the benefit of somebody outside of our own heads kind of giving us an observation. But I did learn from that. Like when I got into my 30s finally, and when I was on appropriate meds to control my episode shifts, I got a whole lot clearer of a head, but I also knew a lot more of what I was looking for a partner. I mean, in my 20s, I probably bounced around back and forth to a lot of people. Granted, the first marriage that I had was started in my mid to late 20s. But even when, and to my ex-wife, if you listen to this, I'm not insulting anything, and I take full accountability for everything I'm going to say. So even she describes that she felt as if I was critical, judgmental, and trying to change her. I never felt like I was those things really. I mean, once I got that clearer head, being on meds and kind of controlling my episodes and stuff, I was able to see a little bit more of like the stronger presence, let's call it, of me trying to influence things. But I never really at the time felt like I was trying to change anybody. But I mean, now with my current relationship that I've been in for 5 years, I avoid that like the plague now. But I also have a much better understanding.
If you're listening and you're on the spectrum, it's very important to find a partner who's going to be understanding, which I'm sure Nick can talk about in just a moment. But if you're listening on Spotify, leave a comment. Tell us about your experiences you've had in relationships. Or if you've dated someone who's on the spectrum, tell us about your experiences dating that person. And just leave it in the comments. I don't think you can leave comments on the other platforms we're on at the moment, but I know on Spotify you can leave a comment. So tell us about it. We want to hear.
And on YouTube.
And on YouTube. If you're listening on YouTube, also leave a comment. Tell us about your experiences with relationships.
And on Facebook.
And we don't post them on Facebook.
Oh.
Yeah.
So
maybe I should, now that you mentioned it.
Well,
I guess.
All right. Yeah, I guess. So
thanks, Nick.
Any platform you're listening to this on and you're able to put a comment, please let us know if you agree or disagree with things we're talking about. If you have a question about anything we're talking about, if you'd like to say that we're doing well or doing not, we really need that kind of feedback. But also, if there's a topic you want us to talk about in any future episode.
Oh, this just in. Big Cock 69 says trash. It's our first comment.
Yeah. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover, or if you just want to hear us babble about whatever the hell, please put that in comments as well. We will read them. We will get back to you as soon as we can. And yes, it will actually be me or Steve that is going to be responding to you.
Always going to talk about topics that are this serious, but I thought it was important to talk about relationships because that's one of the biggest struggles for people who are on the spectrum.
Very much so.
Relationships with other people. So we can't have a podcast about autism and not talk about relationship struggles. And I'm sure some of that, the relationship struggles that we talk about, it may trickle into other episodes when we talk about other things because that's always going to be a factor in anything we do with other human beings. In fact, I was going to say unless you're dealing with other autistic people, but sometimes it's harder dealing with other autists than it is dealing with normies.
So case in point, me and Steve have been friends for 5.5, roughly 6 years.
More than that, almost 7.
Almost 7 years now. We've been friends and we've been working together in an improv sketch comedy group. And now we're doing this podcast together. And I think we can both agree and attest to the fact that sometimes, and excuse the language, our autism gets in the effing way. Why am I censoring F in that? I've said fuck like 7 times on this podcast already. And now I'm censoring myself.
I think normies have a hard time understanding us sometimes, but if you think normies have a hard time understanding us.
You keep saying normies, and somebody's going to put in the comments, how the fuck dare you say they're normal?
Whatever. Neurotypical people have a hard time understanding us.
Hold on. I want you to finish what you're saying, but I want to make sure I'm specifying that when we use the word normal, what we mean by it is not what you heard. What we mean by it is what happens most often, which, by the way, is
listen, I don't have time to explain every time I use a word what the context is.
I will totally give context to other people.
To censor myself. When I say normie, I mean a person who's not autistic.
Yeah, you don't need to censor yourself at all, Steve. I will explain it to people because somebody needs to translate to the normal people.
When you're talking to a neurotypical person, they have a hard time understanding us sometimes, frequently. Less as you get older. If you're like Nick and I think we're able to navigate conversations much easier than when we were younger. However, when you're dealing with somebody else who's on the spectrum, which I have a few friends that I've spoken to, and also dealing with Nick over the years, we have a tendency to misunderstand each other probably more than talking to a neurotypical person, or at least calling out the fact that we don't understand each other, because Nick will use certain words and say things a certain way, and I'm like, what the fuck is he talking about? Or I think that he's saying something that he's not, and vice versa.
And usually that comes in the perception department, right?
Yeah. Or sometimes I am purposely trying to be a dick to you, but usually when I'm trying to be a dick to you, it's because I think that you're trying to be a dick to me. So
yeah, and sometimes we misread the dicknish that we're no, that's not a word.
So
I'll think
that Nick is trying to be a dick to me, but he's not. So then I'm a dick back to him. Then he's like, "Why is he being a dick to me?"
Right, and then
he's a dick back again.
Yeah,
and then it's a back and forth of like, who's the biggest dick?
Yeah,
and it's because of one of us misunderstood the other person to begin with.
So I'm only 42, but I like to describe myself as being a 65-year-old man who's just crotchety and fucking grumpy. because I'm not a big fan of texting. I don't like reading things on a screen because it lacks tonality, it lacks context. I'm not sure how the person's actually saying it. So I actually have a hard time reading things on Facebook Messenger for that reason, especially because I have to try to translate it, especially when I'm talking to a appropriate term, neuronormative person.
Normie.
Yeah, normie. When I'm talking to a normie, I have tendency to read it, but I have to translate it, if you will, to what I think they're talking about in the normal way.
He has autistic Google Translate.
Yeah. And when I'm talking to Steve, sometimes I forget that I don't have to do that. So I end up translating to normal, translating back to autistic, and still going, the fuck did you just say? But I personally don't like
people
texting.
will sometimes assume that there's some type of subtext to what you're saying.
Well,
but
because there is for normal people.
Because typically, not always, because I know how to be like sarcastic or be a jerk if I want to be and be a little subtle. But most of the time when somebody's asking me a question or I'm saying something to somebody, you can take it on face value because I'm usually not.
Oh, you mean when you're talking to them?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant when they're talking. No, normal
no, I'm
people
saying
are
usually
way subtle. They don't ever really.
People read more into my words than's actually there. So it's got me into trouble a lot when I was younger, but now that I'm older, it's another one of those things where I've learned to like try to avoid saying things a certain way because people are going to misinterpret it and not take it at face value.
Right. When I was younger, I had a horrible time being subtle. You're actually far more subtle than I am. You are way more capable of being subtle than I am. When I was younger, I had even harder of a time being socially appropriate, being PC, being subtle about things. I mean, I still struggle with some of that stuff now in conversations, but it's not as bad as it used to be. It used to be bad to the point of like, I would ask people why about something because I was curious, but they took it as me challenging them as a human being or saying that they're dumb or something. And really it was just a matter of I was curious for their perception of something.
Trying to understand.
Yeah. So how did you find dating? Like, I know I've used online dating services before. I know you've used them before. How did you find that experience being
online dating?
Yeah. How did you find online dating?
Online dating
services, didn't I? As
I've
if
never
like
used,
we're recording video.
I've never used like a dating service. I mean, I've used online dating.
You did
apps
online
in the past,
dating.
but,
I'm sorry. Again, I'm a 65-year-old crotchety old man. Okay, I said dating services if it's 1984.
My experience online dating is a dumpster fire, and I think it's a dumpster fire for everyone, not just people like us. Yeah. There's certain things that are probably more difficult than for us than for neurotypical people. However, I would say for everybody it's a dumpster fire, and that's because typically on dating sites, the first thing that you're judged on and the first thing that you don't have a lot to go on. So you're judging people mostly based on appearance. You can read their profile, you can read their bio, but ultimately, like, if you're scrolling through people's profiles, you're going to be interested only in looks. And so, I mean, physical attraction is something that's important to everybody, but there's a lot that is lacking through looking at pictures or a lot of people who are maybe a 5 on a dating app or a 4 or a 3 in a dating app.
Really, we're going to go with a rating
I'm
system?
just using a number system because it's easy to...
Yeah, because it's pragmatic and practical, and that's what
it's
people
easy
like us are.
to make the point, if I phrase it that way.
But
if you meet them in person, they might be a 5 in person might be a 7 because their personality adds a lot to their physical attractiveness.
Yes, very much so.
A woman who is average looking, and I'm saying average looking, whatever. Fuck you.
So basically,
I'm saying average looking, like
to our attractiveness.
If most men would rate her as being average, right, the majority of men would find her average on an imaginary attractiveness scale, right? So if she was a 5, but she might be a lot more attractive in person because of her personality. All of those things are lost in a dating app, and so it becomes basically like a shallow clusterfuck dumpster fire. And that's what I didn't really like about online dating is it's just it's shallow and dehumanizing in a way.
I agree in a way. I always had issues when it came to, because of my, dislike of typing, right? And you do a lot of typing when it comes to communication on dating sites, is I'm very pragmatic and very practical when I talk to people. I'm very direct and to the point, very succinct when I type. And so when I was asking people questions, there wasn't a lot of chit chat. There wasn't a lot of surface conversation. It was direct and to the point of like, well, here are the subjects we need to talk about beforehand. Here's the things we need to know about each other up front. And so, yes, I'm also a male. So a lot of my conversations sometimes leaned into talking about, are we sexually compatible, right? And a lot of women were so used to that from other guys just only wanting sex, but it wasn't the only thing I wanted. I mean, but sex is important. And so I would ask them questions about like, how many kids do they have? How many kids do they want to have? What kind of job do they have? What do they want to aspire to in life? And what preferences do they have?
You're getting too serious. I don't even know you.
Yeah. And so I've always been accused of that, of being too, quote unquote, intense up front. But it was really more a matter of getting to the point.
Well, certain people are like that. They don't want to waste their time investing time or money or dates into somebody if it's not going to go anywhere.
Right. So I just ask all that shit up front.
So like if you know up front that somebody doesn't want kids and you want kids, then why are you going to waste time dating? If they're on the fence and maybe they could be convinced, that's one thing. But if they absolutely don't want kids, then like why are you going to waste time with that?
Right. Exactly.
I wanted to ask something that is not directly related to the topic, but I think it affects the topic.
Okay, rock and roll.
And something that I read about last week. So I was recently let go from a job, and part of that has to do with
say it in the non-subtle, nice way.
Fired? I don't know.
Yeah, that's right.
I was fired.
Right. Steve was fucking fired.
And I wasn't given a reason, and I was reading about there's two things, but I was reading that people on the spectrum often get terminated from jobs without any sort of explanation given. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times jobs will just say things like, oh, well, we just don't think you're the right fit, or we don't think you're a good fit. And it was funny that I was reading that. And this was a blog, an article written by somebody who's on the spectrum. And it was funny because that was the explanation that was given to me, even though I had been given performance-based raise and all these other things. But all of a sudden I was let go out of nowhere without any reason given. Part of that, this is related to what I was going to say, is a lot of times when people on the spectrum are faced with things like that, I was reading, I don't know if this is true. I can say it's kind of true for me. I don't know. I can't speak for you, but people on the spectrum tend to have a strong sense of justice.
Yes.
And
we have a strong sense of what we believe to be right.
And with the strong sense of justice, meaning like we get very upset if somebody does something wrong to us,
right? Or
like, let's say that we have people on the spectrum tend to try to be honest, or they try to do the right thing. That doesn't mean that there's no autistic people who are shitty people, but when somebody wrongs us or breaks the law, a lot of us tend to have a problem with it. And part of that, this is related to it as well, is that a lot of people on the spectrum tend to fall into black and white thinking.
Yes.
And I wanted to hear what you think about that.
My opinion about us falling into black and white thinking?
Yeah, and that also is related to the strong sense of justice because of the black and white thinking plays into that. And also, if you want to talk about the me being fired thing, you can, but I was mostly bringing it up because the reason why this person wrote an article about it is because they were obsessed with the event that happened because they felt like they were wronged.
Right.
And so she was talking about the strong sense of justice that she feels, and a lot of people on the spectrum feel this intense need to fix a perceived wrong when somebody does something terrible to them.
Yeah, I agree with you. We do have tendency to have black and white thinking, which is a cognitive distortion. We do have tendency to fall onto black and white thinking more so than others, and our sense of it happens to be very, very strong.
For the morons out there, can you explain what black and white thinking means?
Oh, so black and white thinking is the old name of what they now call all or nothing thinking. And it's usually listed as the first cognitive distortion, not ranked in order, but just the first one most people talk about, of all or nothing thinking. So it's either one thing or the other, okay, in one way or the other. So like when Steve's talking about strong sense of justice or a strong sense of right and wrong, it's more about the perception that we carry of something being right or wrong. And a lot of the times that right and wrong is based only on our perception, not necessarily like a social moral concept of right or wrong, or like whether something's legal or not. but a lot of the times it has tendency to be our version of it. So when we have a strong sense of being wronged, it could just be wronged against what we feel is the right way.
I've also felt that same way about other people. So for instance,
I mean, we're not the only ones who have black and white thinking.
No, but when I was growing up,
Yeah.
People who used to get bullied, I would often find myself getting into fights defending people who were getting beat up or bullied. So I would step in and defend them because I felt like it was wrong.
Oh.
And I felt so strongly about it that I would get myself into fights because I was defending people who were being bullied.
I just got really agitated and got really like pissy.
Yeah.
And angry sounding.
To me, I had this sense of justice where I felt like I couldn't just let these other kids be picked on and not do anything about it. So I'd find myself getting into fights all the time.
I always kind of left it of, if they have such a problem with it, they should do something about it. So I kind of left it to them to be responsible for how other people treated them.
I guess.
Okay, maybe I'm carrying dick for that, but I'll take it.
Well, that's what I say. The strong sense of justice for me personally was always, it's not just like if a wrong is done to me, but if I see a wrong being done to someone else too, I feel compelled that I have to do something about it.
Well, I feel that way now. When I was younger, like I said, I always felt detached from other people. And so that sense of like, oh, somebody else is being bullied by somebody, I was like, well, they should fucking do something about it then. They should stand up for themselves.
And related back to work, I've had problems with companies I've worked for because if I see them mistreating employees,
right.
And I've worked in a lot of positions where I was part of management, or I was part of operations, and it was a higher up position. And when I see people above me, higher up in the company, like a vice president or something like that, mistreating people, then it makes me not want to work there because I'm like, I can't condone this. I don't agree with this.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, I never thought about that much. I like when I was a manager all the time, when I was younger and I was doing management in retail, when somebody disliked something that was happening or the way I worded something, I was always like, well, go get another fucking job then. There's jobs out there. Go get another shitty retail job then. I don't give a fuck.
I think that would have been my approach when I was first a manager. It was kind of like it's either my way or the highway, which is how I used to treat people. But I've changed over the years as I learned more about how to effectively lead people.
So when I was younger, I felt that way very, very strongly when it came to managerial or supervisory kind of roles. And in my own personal life when I was younger, I didn't act that way. But now it's kind of the opposite of now in my life. If you don't like the way I do things, then don't be in my life.
One of my first, actually, it was two of my first manager roles.
Yeah,
I got into fights. I got into a fight with an employee once.
A verbal fight?
One of them was verbal. One was almost physical.
So still somebody
verbal. Somebody stopped us from actually physically fighting.
Okay.
But it was probably me who was the problem in both situations, but I didn't see it that way at the time.
Right.
I thought I was trying to help and make things better, when in reality, I was being a little tyrant, and I didn't understand at the time. So, like, for instance, when I was a teenager, I worked at Dunkin' Donuts. And I remember this older woman who worked for us, and everybody had kind of their role that they would do. You know, if you worked at the drive-through window, or if you worked making sandwiches and bagels, if you made the coffees, everybody kind of like filled a certain role.
Yep.
And I started forcing people to switch roles because I wanted them to get better at the things they weren't as good at.
Oh.
So when I started switching them around, some of them got really pissed at me because I was switching them around, and maybe it was also because of when I was doing it. Like maybe it's not a good idea to switch everybody up in the middle of a rush in the morning or something like that. Asking people to switch roles.
Yeah.
And one of the older lady who worked started screaming at me and got into a fight. And then my boss at the time ended up sending her home because she yelled at me. And I felt bad because I was probably just being a little dick.
Well, nowadays, would you refer to that older woman as being a Karen?
Maybe.
Okay.
I don't know.
See,
she did used to buy me alcohol when I was underage.
There you go. So, maybe not a Karen.
I used to give her money and she'd go over and get me a handle of Captain. Because back then they used to drink rum and cokes when I was 18.
I used to always manage people in the opposite way, which was, your role, do your job, and just do that. And I never understood why anybody was like, they wanted to learn more or why they were uncomfortable.
I wanted to try to help people get better at the things they weren't as good at.
I didn't give a shit as long as they did their job.
So my reasoning was, and this was stupid because it was just, Dunkin' Donuts, but I thought that there's going to be times where somebody's going to call out or somebody's not going to be available, and I wanted people to be able to fill any role if they had to.
See, I never really thought about it in that way. I probably should have, but I was thinking more along the lines of we have somebody to do that job.
Which is good. If you have somebody who's really good at one thing, but then if they're not there, then you're screwed.
And I got to that thinking eventually, but it was more about and it was a very pragmatic way of thinking about it. This person does drive-thru. And that's where the thinking stopped. That person does it. They're good at it. They should do it, right? And I always think about it I would use the expression a lot, kind of like The Rock. Know your role, right? And yes, I used to watch wrestling, and I still
Mine's
do.
a baguette.
And know your role on a regular basis, right? Do your job. Just do your job. Show up, shut up, do your job. That's the way I behaved on a regular basis, right? It was that kind of rigidity, if you will, right? That kind of harshness as a manager. And when I got older, I started to realize exactly what you're talking about, which is people might be dissatisfied with that one position that they have. Maybe they want to learn more stuff. And also to cover all of the inevitabilities or the variabilities of people calling out, everybody should kind of know a piece of each other's jobs.
Yeah.
But I was very finite about it. But that was part of that black and white thinking you're talking about.
Yeah, I brought it up because, like I said, I'd read about it. I've been reading a lot about people who have had similar experiences. Right. That I had, because recently being let go in the position that I was in, it came as a surprise to me because usually in the past if I've been fired, I knew it was coming because people had spoken to me beforehand and said, hey, we need you to do this or that. But this particular place didn't give me any warning, no write-ups, never gave me any sort of never tried to develop or coach me or tell me that I was doing something wrong. Yeah. So if they had a reason why they were going to let me go, which they didn't give me a reason, although I can't get into it because there are legal implications, but I think I know the reason why.
You could have just said, I don't want to get into it right now.
Yeah. Anyway, the point is that they never, if you're gonna do that type of thing, I would expect more out of somebody in a leadership role to try to actually take the time to develop somebody or correct the behaviors that you don't like.
I gotcha. Especially when I was younger, I can't exactly say that my interactions with people on the job or being let go had something to do with, being autistic or the way I dealt with people, because I also had that undiagnosed bipolar piece. So I was once let go from a job, or rather, let me rephrase. I was talked to about my behavior at a job, but I couldn't discern the difference between the two now looking back on it, because I was also undiagnosed bipolar. So I had my days where I was horribly manic and I was all over the place and I wasn't getting anything really all that done, but I was goofy and energetic and wild. And then there were other days where I could barely get out of bed, and so I'd call out of work. And so I don't know if it's one or the other, and I don't know if the way I communicated to people was appropriate, but I couldn't tell you which one was more in control at that moment, right? But I can tell you that I completely understand what you're talking about. And to relate it back to our topic, yes, that kind of has tendency to be an issue in general, I would think, with a lot of autistic folk, that they feel they're doing well and they're trying to do their best, but somebody else just perceives them the wrong way.
Or you're sending emails to people and they misinterpret what you're saying, and then they think you're an asshole.
Because ultimately we talk,
and then you're a problem, or maybe you're not as engaged during company meetings or whatever, and why is he such? Or a common one I heard when I was reading the article by the same girl. Yeah. She was mentioning
woman.
The water cooler type conversations, not being involved in that kind of stuff, right? And then people think that you think you're better than them, or they're too good to engage in small talk.
Isn't that an amazing thing that normal people fucking do? They immediately try to interpret our behavior as we think we're better than them, or we feel like we know more than they do.
Because they don't want to sit around and chit-chat around the water fountain.
Right, just because we don't want to engage in fucking superficial, idle conversation. I don't give a shit who won the Super Bowl ever, Like, even if I watch football, and at times I've watched football, I'm a big fan of the Carolina Panthers, but I never got into who played wide
Something
receiver.
you'll never hear again from anyone, ever.
Yeah, pretty much. But, like, yes, I like watching football, but, like, I don't actually give a shit who won or lost the fucking game.
Nick.
Huh?
Nick, I think we need to get a little bit more intimate.
So we
before we end the show tonight, we need to talk about sex.
Oh, so we're going to shift drastically.
Well, we're talking about relationships.
Well,
we need to talk
You're
about
right. We should talk about it.
physical intimacy. We touched on proximity, but I thought it would be fun if I just asked you about your experiences with sex.
Well, I mean,
don't worry about the time. I see you looking at the clock.
No, I keep looking at the clock because, okay, so to explain to everybody.
Nick is staring at the clock.
I am very time sensitive, if you will. I'm very time specific about a lot of things. I time a lot of things in my life, okay? And so when it comes to this podcast, we said each episode was going to be an hour long. And so I
don't think I agreed to that. Let's just go.
I mean, that's your conception, but I have to have I have to have boundaries and limits.
If we go for an hour and a half, that's fine.
Okay, fine. So I'm trying to shift gears to not pay attention to time now. Anyway, I'm a very time-oriented person.
Ladies and gentlemen, autism speaks.
Yeah. Okay. So that's one of my things is time. All right. So anyway, you want to shift to talk about...
We don't have to talk about sex for a long time. I mean, if we're talking about your sex life, the conversation's going to be short anyway.
Damn, he threw a joke in there with that.
I'm kidding, actually. I think Nick's had a lot of partners. So.
Wow, you went from calling me a minute man to calling me a slut in like 2 seconds. And I will not disagree. I have had a lot of partners. Some of that has to do with me, and some of that has to do with being disappointing in bed. But then again, so yes, let's talk about that, because honestly, from all podcasts that I've listened to about people talking about being on the spectrum, or rather, not podcasts, but like watching YouTube shorts or videos and stuff, and people talking about it, they don't really talk about that very often. I mean, maybe there is somebody who does, and they're like, you had jackasses, I covered that 2 weeks ago. Don't care if you did or not. I don't actually listen to your shit all that well. But you're right, they don't really cover that very much, and that is probably something to talk about, is sex, is to talk about intimacy. Or rather, because I don't even like associating sex and intimacy. I think intimacy can be had and to be found and can be experienced without getting naked.
So what do you find to be the hardest part about sexual interactions as related to being on the spectrum? Or maybe you have no problems. Maybe it's fine for you.
No, I've had...
Is it just the hardest part is getting them in bed to begin with? Or
well, actually, I can go on both of those, actually. So have you ever had, and you answer yes or no, I'm going to start off with a question, and then I'll tell you and answer your question at the same time. Have you ever found, and I lost my own question. Hold on. Yeah, I lost it completely. I lost what question I was going to ask. So
cool.
say your thing again, so I can try to maybe trigger what the fuck
I was asking you what you thought was the hardest thing about having sex with somebody, or intercourse in general,
or getting them into it,
or sexual interaction. Doesn't matter any part of it, but any sexual interaction. What's the hardest part about that as related to being autistic, or if you don't have any problems at all?
No, absolutely had problems. One of the issues I would say is, and I still haven't gotten the question that I was going to ask. I was going to start off with that. And I thought it was a nice way to word into it, but whatever. One issue I always had was, or at least from my perception of things, was I was super into things. I really wanted to go forward. And it seemed like the other person wanted to. And it felt like the other person wanted to, and we ended up doing stuff. But it was always the pacing of it, let's say. I was always, and it could be for a bunch of reasons. It might not have anything to do with autism.
So what you're saying is that you don't like foreplay.
So I'm not saying I dislike, because I do like foreplay. It's just, I'd rather get down to it, right? If we're going to engage in sexual behavior, all right, fuck it, let's get down to it. Let's do our thing.
You don't like to be a bird, flashing your feathers and doing a little dance before you mate?
So I guess I just have a different version of that. Or at least I used to have a different version of that. Again, when I was undiagnosed bipolar and I was just existing in my phase, in my episodes, when I was manic, it was all about get down and get quick, right? But when I was depressed, it was like, oh, thank you for showing me any kind of acceptance. Thank you for wanting me in any way whatsoever.
I think one thing that might be easier for you or for both of us as we get older is dating older women. You don't have as many of those issues, I would think. I think when you're dating younger women or dating younger people in general, that there's more, there's more that needs to go into it. Like there's more of a game back and forth, more chasing each other. Whereas I think with an older woman, they typically know what they want, or they're not afraid to just get into it if they want to be intimate.
Well, I actually have more experience dating people who are my age or older, and being intimate with people who are my age or older more so than younger. In fact, I've never been a huge fan of like dating or even screwing around with people who are too much younger than me.
So you're not Leonardo DiCaprio?
No, I'm not Leo by any means. I mean, just
or R. Kelly.
Just thinking about it for a minute, like I'm pretty sure that I've always kind of followed the three-year rule, right? Like never get involved with or never screw around with somebody who is more or less than 3 years from you. I have my moments where there are people older than me that I messed around with. Like when I was 19, I had a 2-year relationship with somebody who was 24 to begin with. And so by the end of the relationship, they were 26. My ex-wife is
so what you're telling me is you were groomed.
I mean, if I was 12 and they were whatever the fuck age they were, that would be grooming, I guess.
What about the physical part of sex?
So the physical part, again, going back to that touching the face thing, kissing has always been a problem for me. I've always had a problem kissing.
So that's why you prefer anal. Because you don't have to make eye contact and you can avoid the kissing.
Okay, so it's not necessarily eye contact, but it is eye contact. It's
brown eye contact.
It's also the proximity to the face. Like I do have a problem open mouth kissing somebody. Like my current partner has an understanding of this, so we will peck on the lips, or she'll kiss me on the cheek, or she'll kiss me on the forehead. She kisses me on my ear, but I fucking hate that, the fucking sound of it in my ear, and it's fucking agitating. Anyway.
Oh, I used to date a girl who would make this like, she would do something like a peck or something in my ear.
Right.
That was so loud it like made my eardrum pop. And I'm like, can you not do that?
Right. But that's what.
But she would do it anyway.
My current partner did for a while.
And then I would do it to her, and she's like, I don't see what the problem is. I'm like,
well, of course they don't, because they don't have fucking sensory issues. All right. So. And you can probably hear the agitation in my voice because it's always been an issue. So
that's a common response to any problems we have when you're dating somebody. Is I don't see what the problem is. Yeah. Like, because you're not me. You don't get it. You and they keep doing it anyway. Yeah,
because it's not a problem to them and they don't understand.
It's like, hey, can you not do that? I'm just going to keep doing it.
I told you I got an issue with it. Why don't we leave it there? And then some of my partners have always responded with, well, I don't like it when you blah, but you keep doing it. You just told me to stop being me. Like, what the fuck? Anyway, you asked about being intimate.
The physical part.
Yeah, the physical part. Like, the kissing part has always been kind of an issue. And that's come into conflict because I'll start dating somebody. I like being with them and whatnot. But they're like, you never really kiss me. Well, no shit. I got a fucking problem with it. But they had they thought I wasn't being as affectionate, or they thought I wasn't being as intimate because I didn't open mouth kiss them. Well, for one, I've never really had the greatest oral hygiene ever. For whatever reason you want to call it, I've never been great at brushing my teeth regularly. Okay? To be honest with you, I still struggle with it to this day. Okay?
Nice.
And everybody who's ever met me fucking knows that, right? But I mean, I've gotten much better at it now, not to try to defend myself, but I have gotten much better at brushing my teeth regularly now. And trying to take care of myself hygiene-wise better now. But when I was younger, in my 20s, I wasn't very good at it, so I was self-conscious about that. And I thought that's the only reason why I didn't want people near my face. I really did. For the longest time, I thought that was the only reason why, is because I was kind of shitty at taking care of myself. But once I got a little bit clearer of mind and I got on my meds and I went through therapy, I started to come to the understanding that it was literally the proximity. And maybe that's why I did certain things hygienically. I didn't take care of myself very well because I was giving myself the excuse to step away. I was giving myself the excuse to not be around them or making them not want to be near me because of that.
Nick, I understand all of that. But what about that dick, though? I need to hear
Okay.
about your penetration story.
So, okay, you want to hear my penetration story?
Sorry, I
One,
can't assume
Hold
that
on.
you're the one doing the penetrating. So
You can't assume that actually
Yeah,
for
okay.
me. No. When it comes to things like that,
do you have
Here
any
is-
problems with the
here's-
physical act of sex?
Here is an honest to God statement out of me. No matter what penetration, me into someone or me getting from somebody else, it's icky and it's gross. No matter if it's a male or a female. I don't know why I have that opinion, but there's always a hesitation for me. Well, granted, I like the act of sex. I like the act of an orgasm or the action of it or the feeling of it. But it's just that initial thought process of like, I'm touching somebody's wet parts that always feels
I wish I had a
little weird.
soundboard right now.
You would
Like a radio,
absolutely
like a
do
shitty
sounds.
radio
Yes,
host, like
yes.
with the sound effects.
You would do some
a
really
boing,
rather
boing, boing.
disgusting fucking sounds. You would. And I don't disagree. We should probably
I could
that
add some in
eventually.
post if I really wanted to, but
God.
I didn't think it was that kind of show.
You really would.
I like
do
it
that
just
too.
to be unedited, just spewing shit
raw
out of our
and
mouths.
genuine. Yeah.
As raw as all of the people Nick's fucked. So
I mean, that's for the most part, that's not a bad assessment.
he's a big fan of raw dogging it.
That's really not a horrible assessment, actually.
Speaking of raw dogs, Nick also likes to eat cold hot dogs.
I do like hot dogs. Well, I mean, you like to point
What was that
out
thing that you-
I also enjoy men, so no
What was
shit,
that thing
I like
that you-
tubular
you-
meat, all right?
I found out not so long ago that you will something disgusting. You'll just like throw a hot dog like
It's not disgusting. I will take four or five hot dogs out of a
God.
package, put them on a plate. I will put 2 pieces of cheese across them. I will put them in the microwave for 2 minutes, and I will add syrup
How are
or
you
ketchup
still
on top
alive?
of them.
I don't like. How does someone survive on a diet like that? You must have like ass cancer.
I
You must
used
have undiagnosed colon
Well, I
cancer.
used to eat it like that on a regular
All that
basis.
processed meat.
Well,
There's
you
probably
know.
like a tumor the size of my fist in your colon,
No, I honestly...
which you
last-
wouldn't know because when you get fisted, it's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
it feels like the
I've
lump
never
that's
once
already
been
there.
fisted. Thank you very much. All right. So, when it comes to that food product, I don't know. I just like eating fucking hot dogs. All right. Large amounts of them actually, but I've always eaten that. Like, and according to my doctor, last time I saw my doctor right before COVID, my doctor said I was fine. Like I had no major health issues.
I've never liked hot dogs just because they tend to give me a stomach ache. They tend to give me like a sour stomach. But pretty much any processed meat does. Like any like highly processed meat gives me stomach ache.
Yeah, I don't have that problem.
So
okay,
if we're gonna wrap up,
no, we don't have to. We're still. I thought we were
Oh.
still talking. That's so, dude. I am
We
the
can.
only one who talked about
before we
sexual
wrap
activities.
up, before we wrap up today, though, I want to tell you a joke, a very
Okay.
inappropriate joke. Before we end, so we can still continue, but before
Great.
we end, I want to tell you an inappropriate joke to lighten the mood because we've had a mostly serious discussion today.
Really?
Besides me talking about your fucked up hot dog eating,
And other jokes that we've said along the way.
it's mostly me making fun of you.
Yes. Yeah.
But-
Isn't that how we prepare for every show we do?
Yeah.
Before every single improv show we've ever done.
I would promote our show
Steve
tomorrow, but these people aren't gonna. Anybody hearing this is not gonna hear it in time for the show.
No, they won't. No, they won't. So anytime before a live show we've ever done, Steve always warms up for the show by roasting me right before every single show. And so whenever there's been an idea or somebody has said, hey, how about you roast Nick for one of your next roast shows? It's always like, why? Steve does it before every show anyway. So anyway, asking me those questions, I've always like, when it comes to doing things sexually with people, like I do have my preferences of things. It's always been a little like odd. It's mostly like I feel uncomfortable doing it, but there's also that biological imperative to do things. And so I've always gotten into it and I've always kind of done it. But at times that I've always wanted to do it as quickly as possible.
Do you think that? So you mentioned before
Uh-huh.
that people who are on the spectrum
Mhm.
have a tendency to be more sexually fluid or more.
Yeah.
They tend to be. They're overrepresented when it comes to people who are gender diverse or sexually diverse.
Overrepresented, but yes, it has to. So gender fluidity.
Well, when I say
and sexual
overrepresented,
fluidity
I
has
mean like
tendency to happen more in the population of ASD people.
Right. So
than
it'd
in the regular
compared
population.
to, yeah, right. So that's what I mean by overrepresentation.
Yeah. I mean, there happens to be a lot more, let's call it diversity or variability when
Does
it comes
that
to
also
that.
include sexual kinks or fetishes?
Yes. Yes, it does.
So do you think that there's more people who would, for instance, be into like, so being a furry is not necessarily sexual, but there is a sexual component to it for a lot of people. But
For
do you
some
think
people. Yeah.
people like that, or people who are into, I don't know, like foot fetishes, things like that would be more often?
Here's how I'm going to sum up all of it and kind of describe it is when it comes to folks on the spectrum, in my opinion, and from what I have read and talked to people about, people on the spectrum happen to be far more... Hold on.
Yeah, I still heard that.
I know you did, but I turned off my mic just so
Nick had to turn his head and say
sneeze.
a Jew really loud. I don't.
Dick.
Just once in a while,
right.
he has to tame and temper his anti-Semitism,
Oh, geez,
so it only
you
comes out
dick.
in small
All right.
pieces. By the way, he is
So-
wearing Yeezys today. If that helps his case, I don't
I'm
know.
wearing what?
Yeezys. It's a joke.
What's...
Yeezys are like Kanye's shoes.
Oh, that guy's shoes.
Because he's
all right.
all the anti-Semitism.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
That was
All
the
right,
joke.
So when it comes to people on the spectrum, we have tendency to be, in my opinion, and also from what I've read and also from meeting people who are on the spectrum, we have tendency to be far more accepting, understanding, and exploratory when it comes to all things that might be enjoyable, all variations of things. So we... From my estimation, we have tendency to be far more into trying things and not boxing ourselves into a place like others.
So people on the spectrum are trisexual because they'll try anything.
Really? You're going to go with that old school fucking joke at trisexual? All right. No, like, I have found from talking to folks on the spectrum, not always, but especially on our end of the spectrum. Yes, I'm going to use function language, high function side, or what used to be Asperger's syndrome.
Bigot.
For Aspies, we have tendency to be far more variable or varied when it comes to our sexual identities and when it comes to our sexual preferences and even when it comes to our gender identities. We have tendency to be far more fluid than, say, the normal folk.
Do you think that what I mentioned, the whole kink and fetish thing,
Yeah.
that some of that might be related to the fixation on certain things? So like if you're
Could be.
like
Could be.
autistic people tend to hyper fixate on things. So if you're into something sexually, maybe you would hyper fixate on the one thing or the kink that you have.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Although I have
in a lot of
heard
ways. something.
something about, this is interesting because this is more your territory than mine,
Yeah.
but there's a part of the brain that processes things that are disgusting
Yes.
and things that we're repulsed by, like the smell of rotting flesh or
Right. Or the things we're supposed to be.
right. It's also in the same area of the brain that processes things that you're aroused by.
Mhm.
And that is an explanation, or supposedly an explanation for people who are into things that are kind of gross.
Yeah.
Is that there's a cross there between the part of the brain that's supposed to be disgusted, but instead that person's aroused by it. So for instance, like people who are into like, I don't know, anything that's considered disgusting
Well, I mean,
by most people.
I was just about to say, like, when it comes to that arousal piece, right? There's
Yeah.
a big difference between mental or cognitive arousal and physical arousal. Because physically, your body doesn't give a shit what the fuck it is. It's aroused by something. And arousal isn't necessarily a sexual thing. Your body just gets stimulated.
I tried to
by
tell that to my
anything.
camp counselor, but it didn't really seem to make a difference.
Wow.
He
went
thought I
camp
was into
counselor
him.
on that. God, I can't believe you didn't say Boy Scout leader. Jeez, he went camp counselor. So our
He
bodies
said I was asking
physically
for
don't
it.
care. I think I read something once upon a time, or maybe I'm just talking about my ass. It could be both at the same time, that there was a psychic experiment, a research study about arousal itself. And they showed people images of both heterosexual, homosexual acts, and just in general sexual acts. And they tried to measure the body's reaction compared to what the person identified as for their sexual identity. And what they found was that people got aroused by sexual acts, period. It didn't matter what kind. They were aroused, not necessarily equally, but they were still physically aroused by sexual acts. So in that regard, like if you think about that, based on just that idea alone, sexuality in a lot of ways is a preference of ours, who we choose to, right? And so me identifying as being bisexual, like I know full well I'm attracted to both men and women. I know I can be aroused sexually by both men and women, right? But somebody who identifies as being heterosexual, that's in their mind. That's in their conception of who they are as a human being. That's not their physical body. Their physical body doesn't give a shit what fucking hole they put their dick into. Or for a woman, it doesn't matter who's playing with their clit. They're going to get aroused by it. Now, granted, somebody's going to argue and just be like, no, if a woman touched me,
it's
I'm into
Adam
men.
and Eve, Nick, not Adam and Steve.
But you are Steve. You are the third person in that equation. Apparently.
So God created Adam, Eve, and Steve.
Yeah, God created Adam, Eve, and you.
And then they had weird three-way orgies in the Garden of Eden.
I don't know if I want to go that far. Like they'd start talking to
so
you
you're
and just be like,
telling
nah,
me that
good.
That Eve had the old Chinese finger trap maneuver done to her.
He said finger trap.
And that's why she needed to eat the apple afterwards. It was.
Well, I mean, maybe Steve was into Adam, and so it wasn't a finger trap situation. It was more of like, you know,
God was like, all right, well, this isn't gonna work. So we need Eve here, so you guys can make more Steves.
Right.
Okay.
Maybe it was a matter of like Adam and Steve had the relationship, and Eve was just there for practical, like
for doing like the
propagation
dishes
species.
and the laundry.
Right. And only when one of them was off hunting, they had some hole to put
when I
it
looked
in.
at our statistics, the majority of our listeners were female, but after that comment, I don't know if they're going to be.
Yeah, we just lost all viewership right there.
It's all right. I occasionally say sexist things. My girlfriend appreciates it, even though she knows I'm not sexist.
And to be honest with you, anybody who just heard him say that, she actually does laugh at it, and she really does kind of like enable him to say sexist shit.
But because she knows I don't actually mean it.
Right. I mean, you are not actually sexist, even though anybody who's ever talked to you would think you're sexist, racist, bigoted, and homophobic. But he's none of those things in reality.
It's just fun to pretend.
Really, would we describe it as fun to pretend?
So when things? Like, for instance, if I make a joke where I'm saying something that's bigoted, I'm usually mocking the bigot.
Right. You are.
Like, that's the joke. So for instance, I don't remember exactly what the context was, but I made a joke once and I actually offended somebody who was Spanish. And I made a joke about like, we speak English here or something like that.
Right.
But when I said that joke, I wasn't being sincere. At least it was obvious to me. I was making fun of people who actually say things like that sincerely. But it was lost on the person because I got offended and thought I was being serious. So like, no, if I was being serious, why did I do the weird accent?
Right.
Like I wouldn't do a weird voice if I was being serious and like, we speak English.
So I want to ask you, because you've asked me, and obviously I've just been talking about sexual acts and my fucking issues or non-issues with them. Let me ask you, like, have you had issues being intimate or doing sexual acts?
I think for a long time, in order for me to have sex with somebody, I had to be intoxicated.
How come?
For a comfortability thing, like I get kind of anxious.
Okay.
Or
what was it? Because you were naked with them? Was it because it was a sexual act?
Well, when I was younger, I was always very sexually conservative. Like I wanted to.
I'm sorry, what does that mean?
So initially, when I first started dating, I wanted to try to like wait till marriage before I had sex, which didn't happen because I had sex when I was 16. But yeah. But I didn't. I was, I had this idea that I was just gonna wait and then find one person, stay with them. This, naive thinking that I had.
I will say I never once in my life had that thought.
And so whenever I did have sex with somebody, I thought it was a big deal.
Yeah.
And so for me, it wasn't just sex. It was like a big thing. Mm-hmm. And if I did have a sexual relationship with somebody and the relationship didn't work out, I always felt more hurt when it ended because I felt like I was being vulnerable with that person. And for me, sex was more of a big deal, I guess, which is why I didn't really sleep around as much as you did. I guess I was more of I wouldn't say I was a prude per se, but I was like, I was reluctant to just have sex with anybody. And in fact, a lot of the women that I was with were often the aggressors. Not to say that I was never the aggressor, because a lot of times I did initiate sex with
different aggressor. Can you say?
When I say aggressor, I mean like they're the one to initiate
Yeah, say more assertive, because saying aggressor, somebody's going to hear you and be like, were you raped?
I mean,
no,
I was, but...
not by your former partners.
Oh, okay.
Jesus. All right. So, as you described that, okay, as you described your conservativeness, it sounded more like, so if I removed your gender from it, it sounded more like the stereotypical way that women have tendency to explain that.
Yeah. I mean, but I was also...
about sexual intercourse.
I grew up with 2 women, so maybe that plays into it, because I don't know.
I mostly grew up with my mom being...
Well, you know, you're the one who always talks about socialization.
I do.
And like, I tend to believe that the way people behave and the person they become is a mixture of nature and nurture. And in my opinion, you tend to downplay the nature part of it. Right. But what I'm talking about right now is the nurture part of it. I'm saying that I spent a lot of time around 2 girls growing up. Right. Not that my dad was not around at all, but he wasn't in the picture as much. Mm-hmm. And so, like, there were certain things that he did which were the stereotypical, like, masculine or manly ways to do things. Right. And, like, I used to get embarrassed when I saw him. If he looked at a woman, or if he checked out a woman, or he made a comment about a woman, her body or something, it made me feel uncomfortable. Like, so for instance, when I was a kid, when I was like maybe 12 or 13, my dad once took me to a Hooters once. And I felt so uncomfortable that we ended up leaving the restaurant and going somewhere else. We didn't eat there.
Well, I didn't have necessarily that strong of a reaction, but I always felt very uncomfortable looking at women too. I mean, I did it, but I felt uncomfortable about it and almost shameful to even look in the direction of a beautiful woman or a woman I found attractive.
It was more so what I was talking about is him making comments. Or other men like...
Yeah, I have a problem with other men making comments about...
So, like, if I was with a guy and he's like, oh, check out her tits. Like, that to me would be like, make me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind if a male or a female friend points out that they see somebody who they find attractive. But, yeah, when it gets specific to the point of, like, look at the butt on her, I'm always like, we don't need that. Nobody needs to hear that.
It used to make me feel uncomfortable when people did that kind of stuff around me. But I didn't know if maybe part of that was growing up with 2 women. So maybe I was more empathetic to, you know, to I didn't grow up around guys acting like pigs all the time. So maybe that was why. I don't know.
I mean, I didn't necessarily grow up with men being like that either, necessarily.
But you're saying that I was trying to explain or give a reason why maybe I was more sexually reserved.
Okay.
Or the way that I treated sex.
Did that sustain as you got older?
Kind of.
Okay.
I mean, I definitely...
right now? How are you nowadays?
I opened up a lot more. And in fact, for a period of time when I was in my mid to late 20s, I started sleeping around a little more, like having casual sex, but I still was very weird about it. Like, I had, even with the casual encounters I had, they were not like one night stands. They were people that I was sleeping with for a period of time, and I would usually only do it with one person at a time. It wasn't like I was sleeping with 3 girls at once. It was sleeping with one girl for a while in a casual relationship. I've only done maybe 1 or 2 one night stands. Yeah. Because for me, the couple times I did do it, I felt kind of dirty afterwards. Made me feel shame. I felt weird about doing it. Something about just putting myself out there and being with a person sexually that one time and then never talking to them again. Like, that to me felt gross. I don't know why. I can't really explain it, but it made me feel dirty. Maybe it made me feel like shitty about myself. Yeah. Made me feel like I was degrading myself, or made me feel like I was...
and some people would agree with that feeling. I think probably more people would agree with the way you're describing that more so than not agree with it. I always felt that when I engaged with somebody sexually, whether it's a one night stand or just a few times, we were both getting what we wanted out of it, out of the arrangement. And so I kind of chalked it up to that. Right. I just,
it wasn't like the girls that I had one night stands with didn't know what was going on. So like they knew what was going on. It was just, I still felt weird about it. I don't know.
I never had that feeling. And that doesn't mean you're weird or odd or anything like that. I just don't necessarily relate with that moment. I was always described as being a serial monogamist. And in fact, one of the first people who ever called me a serial monogamist was my mother. But I've always kind of been a serial monogamist. I mean, I
guess that would be the same way. Like I've had a lot of short relationships. I've had a few long-term relationships, but I also had a lot of small relationships that only lasted for like, 1 to 4 or 5 months,
right?
Which I would call a short relationship. It lasted less than a year.
Right. I agree. Like to me, a relationship is anything after 12 months. Anything shorter than that, like not that big of a deal. I mean, spending 9 months or 10 months with somebody is a good period of time. It's just, you're not even really past the courting phase of a relationship anyway at that point.
It's just in retrospect, understanding, back then I didn't know that I was on the spectrum. So as I got older, a lot of the things that I did that probably, like the things that I did that contributed to those relationships not working out are more apparent to me now. Whereas back then I had no fucking clue. I just thought something was wrong with me or that I was unlovable. So I blame myself for it all the time. Like, oh, something wrong with me. Actually, I would switch back and forth. Yeah. I would switch back and forth, either all or nothing. It was, I was wrong. There's something wrong with me. I hate myself. I felt depressed. Or I would switch it and I would feel the opposite. And I was like, well, I'm correct. Everything about me is right. They're wrong. They're the ones who are fucked up. They just don't appreciate me and understand what a great person I am. And I was also, I don't know if this contributes to it, but when I was a teenager, I was diagnosed with bipolar. But I've never been on medication or anything. I was for a short period of time in high school, but I not currently on medication for it. And I don't have nearly as bad of a swing as you do as far as ups and downs, but I do go through extreme highs and lows. I tend to be more low. But when I go through those high periods, I get very full of myself.
Yep.
And I start to think that everyone else is a piece of shit. And that I'm basically God's gift to the world. Yep. I'm the best. I'm the smartest. I'm the most talented. Most capable. Everyone else is fucking stupid. And it would be that way in relationships. So if like something ended at first, I would be upset. And then if I was switching to like more of a higher period, I would start to feel the opposite. Instead of feeling depressed or hating myself, I would feel like they're a fucking piece of shit. They just didn't appreciate me because of how fucking awesome I am. And it's amazing how I can hate myself for 6 months and then go to kissing my own ass for a month or two after that.
So for all of my bipolar friends out there, he did describe manic pretty well, didn't he? Especially you hypomanic out there. He absolutely described it pretty well.
Well, that's how I still feel that way sometimes, but it's just not as bad. But I go through periods of time where I'll feel, but I don't act on it. But I'll go through periods of time where I feel like telling all of you guys to fuck off. Yeah. When I say you guys, I mean you and the rest of my friends or people that we do comedy with.
Right.
Sometimes I'm just like, you know what? Fuck all these people. I don't need them. I can do better than all of you.
I know, and I call you on that shit every time. Just like you should call me on it, but you never do. And I feel the same way at times. I will have times where I'm like, why in the fuck am I dealing with all these people who just can't fucking do this shit? Well, part of it is because I can't do it on my own, and I know that.
It also causes more self-doubt sometimes because I don't know whether if my judgment is sound or if it's not. I think now that I'm older, it's typically more sound because I scrutinize my thoughts a bit more. But
yeah, so do I. I scrutinize your thoughts more too.
I don't know, so for instance, I can't ever tell if something I do is good because people will tell me it's good, but a lot of times people aren't always honest. So sometimes I'll feel like I did something good, but I'm like, is this me just being too cocky or too confident, or am I actually good? Because my default is typically to doubt myself. And I know it's interesting. Typically, one thing that people say is the higher intelligence someone has, like the smarter someone is, they're typically full of more self-doubt. And you heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Nope. Well, maybe, but
Dunning-Kruger effect it's actually, I'm pretty sure it's a psych term, but
of course I know all psych terms, Steve.
Well, I just thought you were an encyclopedia.
But maybe somebody listening to
You're
us
an autistic guy who's into psych. I figured you would know every term. Anyway, Dunning-Kruger effect.
But I do know quite a lot.
Dunning-Kruger effect doesn't necessarily apply to just base intelligence, but it applies to knowledge in a particular subject. So basically the Dunning-Kruger effect is when you start out doing something that you don't know, your confidence in your ability to do that thing is very low. But as you start to gain a little bit of knowledge, your confidence level jumps up to a point where you're typically way more confident than you should be. So for instance, let's say I'm an amateur. I'll use myself as an example. So when I started video editing, right?
Uh-huh.
When I started video editing and once I got the basics down and I started being able to do decent video editing,
Right.
I thought I was fucking awesome. I could edit anything and I was really amazing at it. But then the Dunning-Kruger effect is like a bell curve.
Uh-huh.
You hit a point where you think you're fucking awesome and you're amazing and you're an amateur, right? But you think you're really good. And then as you start to learn more, the more knowledge and the better you get at something, your confidence level starts to drop again because you realize how much there is that you don't know.
Dude, you're literally describing everybody learning anything.
Right, but that they call that effect, they call it the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is...
No, that's what it's called.
People tend to have this undeserved confidence when they start learning something because they feel like they know everything.
Right, we get kind of good at something and we go, oh shit, I'm great at this.
Right.
And then we figure out that there's way more to learn.
Like if you start playing basketball and you get pretty decent at it, but then you realize that there's so much about basketball you don't fucking know.
Right.
So like people who are the best in a given sport or the best in a given field often are full of self-doubt because they know how much there is that they don't know or how much there is that they're not masters at yet. Even though they're better than most people.
I think we all go through that. And you're saying we do, right?
Right. It's a rule or it's a human behavior thing.
Right.
Like humans tend to do this and that's why it's a bell curve. Like you have this unearned sense of confidence when you start getting decent at something, you feel like you're fucking amazing, and then
as you describe that, I wonder if anybody's ever tried to measure that effect on people who are autistic or even on who have any mental health disorder.
I don't remember why I was bringing it up now. I was talking about intelligence, for some reason, but
all right. So you had a point behind that, but in explaining what the effect is, you lost the point.
I was talking about intelligence.
Nice.
And
you were talking about getting good at something.
I was talking about intelligence and how so people who are high functioning autism tend to have a
Aspies.
They tend to have a higher IQ.
Yes.
And maybe a lower EQ.
Yes. Or at least that's the way they describe it.
Yeah, I'm just using those terms because they're easy to understand.
Yep.
Because I think you can argue that EQ and IQ aren't necessarily real things, kind of, but
sure, totally different show, but yes.
But IQ, people who are on the spectrum tend to have a higher IQ, like high functioning people.
Or at least our side of it, actually, I can't say just our side of it because it's really hard to discern somebody's level of intelligence when they're just scripting all the time.
So I remember my point now. My point
what was your point?
Is that people who are intelligent tend to doubt themselves a lot more than people who are not as intelligent.
Yes.
And so I'm not saying that I'm a fucking genius by any measure, but by other people and by peers, I've always been considered by people to be someone who's intelligent.
Yes.
And I constantly doubt myself, or even if it's something that I'm that other people think I'm talented at, I have a hard time accepting that something I do is good. And then when I do feel like I did something good, I'm like, is this just me being cocky or being full of myself? Or if I'm going through like a manic period, is this me being overconfident because I'm going through a high period where I just think I'm the shit?
Right.
And I have to question it. I feel like I can't ever just accept that I did something well.
I guess I'm kind of the same way in ways. I actually let other people decide whether I'm good or bad at something. I try nowadays, especially, I don't even bother putting thought towards if I'm good at something or not. I just kind of do stuff. And if somebody wants to think I'm good at it, great. And if they think I'm bad at it, whatever. It happens the same way for me. Because of my periods of highs and lows, like depending on what episode I'm in, depends on how I'm going to evaluate it. And so if I'm wicked hot, if I'm manic, if I'm in one of my hypomanic episodes, I'm going to think everything I'm doing is as good as it's going to get, right? Nobody's going to be able to do it faster or better or more efficiently than me. I'm going to figure out things nobody else can figure out with this. And none of that's true. But then when I'm depressed, I'll think everything I'm doing is absolute garbage and shit, even though I'm putting the same level of work and effort into something and I'm getting the same result out of it. I will still evaluate it that way. So I stopped listening to my own thought process, my own feelings about it, and I let other people decide.
I think there's truth in the old adage of ignorance is bliss.
Oh yeah, very much so.
And sometimes I wish I didn't know things that I know because I feel like I would just be less anxious sometimes and maybe less depressed at times. I feel like life would be easier if I was dumber.
Life. It wouldn't be the same life that you have
If
now.
I was dumber, I feel like I would be happier. And in fact, I'm pretty sure there's studies that show that people who are less intelligent tend to be happier or more content.
I would probably agree with that.
There's higher levels of anxiety and depression among people who are smarter.
Probably, and I completely agree that that's probably a thing. Not that I've ever read any studies or anything that actually said that, but
maybe next time we can delve into what I was related to anxiety and depression. I wanted to ask you about dopamine and social media and about things that I think are contributing to things like that, but we can get into that another time.
That'd be wonderful. And actually let me study a little bit before I have the conversation. So maybe I can cite something for real,
Nick,
opposed to my own opinion.
I think it's time for a joke that's going to get us canceled before we go.
Dude, we're not quite at 2 hours.
You want to go to 2 hours?
Well, I mean, 2 episodes, right?
We're going to do a separate recording for that.
Oh, we don't have time to do another one. Wait, actually. Yeah, we do. It's 5:05.
All right. So,
local time, 5:05.
Yeah. Here's a joke for you.
Okay.
That's going to get us canceled.
That's fine.
What is the hardest part about being a pedophile?
What?
Fitting in.
Jesus. Jesus. That's the joke you've been waiting to say for the last 40 minutes?
I thought it was hilarious.
It is. I'm just thinking somebody just heard you say that joke. Yeah, it's fucked up.
I don't know if I could tell pedo jokes if I'm going to get canceled on Spotify.
But I don't think they give a shit. Isn't Joe Rogan on Spotify and they didn't cancel him? Although he is the most widely listened to podcast in the world.
This episode is brought to you by ivermectin.
Jesus.
And hydrochloroquine. No.
Please no. All
right. Well, I think it was fun.
I think so too. It was a good conversation, man. So just to reiterate from before, if you are on one of those services where you can put a comment, put any comment you would like. If you like the show, let us know. If you don't like the show, let us know. But if you're going to tell us what you don't like about it, please specify what you don't like about it. Don't put the little hand emoji of the middle finger up. Don't put that. Actually, if you do put that, just put a sentence afterward that's like, you people fucking suck because I don't like you, or whatever you want to say. But if you have a question about anything we said, or if you'd like to ask us a question about who we are or what we do, please drop a comment in, as well as make some suggestions for other topics that we can talk about.
Yeah, what he said.
And also to reiterate, we are not experts in a single thing in life. In fact, we're only experts at one thing each, and that's who we are. And that's all we're experts at. Although we are about to try to wrap up because we've got an improv comedy rehearsal that we've got to do tonight. We've got to run an improv comedy group tonight.
All right, Mr. Rogers, thank you.
Oh, won't you be my neighbor? All right. Why did I put a Southern accent on Mr. Rogers?
I don't know.
He didn't have a Southern accent.
All right. It's time to stop recording.
Yeah, all right.
I'm going to leave that in too.
All right. Bye, everybody.